everyone, it's Leanne here. Welcome to another video at my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to show you how I created a heart and roses themed watercolor card. And to begin, I'm using the Roses for You stamp set from Simon Says Stamps. Now I'm going to use the main stamp from this. So it is a cluster of roses in the shape of a heart. And typically, I think when I first looked at this, I thought this would be a perfect Valentine's Day card, and it would be easy to color those red. But I wanted to do something a little bit different, and so that it's not just a one time of year type of stamp, that it could be used any time of year. So I'm laying this down on my acrylic block, and this is my first time using Simon Says Stamp products. I have the ink pad in Island Blue, and I noticed that their stamps are very thick and a real strong, durable I guess polymer or plastic that they're made out of. So I was really impressed with the quality of this stamp. So when I first stamped the Island Blue, I didn't want the roses to be overwhelmingly blue from the ink. So I did one stamp first on a scrap piece of paper, and then I did a second stamp on my card so that I would get a lighter outline of the stamp. And I really wanted the watercolors to show through and be the main focal point of the coloring and of the image. So just by doing this double stamp, it weakened a little bit of the ink on the stamp, but it still put the lines that I could use as a reference guide. So I'm putting this on watercolor paper, and this is 140 pound, I do believe. It's a Strathmore paper. And so I'm making sure to press that because it's a pretty gritty paper, so I want to make sure that the stamp presses into all of the rivets and bumps on the paper. So I'm just going to set up my watercolors. I'm using a Winsor & Newton Cotman watercolor palette, and this is a travel half pan set. And I picked this up at Michael's, and I think it was regular $35, something like that. So I've just sped up the video here so you can see the process of all the watercoloring. Now to begin, I laid down kind of a swirl in between the roses of water, and I thought I would let the blue just kind of float within the water line. Once I did that, I wasn't quite happy with how it turned out, so I blotted that off and I decided to just do a base wash of blue for the roses. And I'm keeping the concentrated part of the pigment towards the center of the roses. So when I paint the roses, the center will be the darkest because that's where the petals are closer together and they create the most shadows. So just as a first wash, this will be pretty light when it dries, but I'm keeping that concentrated part towards the center just to help build up those lights and darks and that sort of thing. So I'm just picking up the colors for the little petals too. So I'm putting green. And blue and green are nice colors together, so I thought that this was a nice sort of harmonious palette to use. And it was something unique and different than just using red roses, because that I think would commonly be your first thought when you see this stamp. So once that dried, I went in again and I just added another line of the same blue and just creating more shadows. So every time there's a swirl, I'm creating the shadows on the underside of the roses on the bottom. So I'm just enhancing the lines that the stamp has for those swirls and creating the shadows underneath those lines, just to help give the roses a bit more pop and dimension and make them feel like they're actual layers swirled around each other. And then as I built up my shadows too, I used a little bit more of the darker blue in my pan set, which is Ultramarine Blue. And so I would mix that with my, I think it's Phthalo Blue. I have to check on that. I'll put the colors all in the description below. But every time I dipped into my lighter blue, I added a little bit more Ultramarine just to enhance the shadows and make them darker as I build them up layer by layer. And that's the thing with watercolors too. You can use a concentrated amount. I find with the half pans it's hard to use more watercolor paint and less water. You really have to wet those pans and get them activated, and by doing that you kind of you get a watery puddle to work with of the paint. So I find that it's easier to work in washes with pans. I think if you were using tube paints, then you could use more of a concentrated application. So instead I've opted to build up in layers with washes. So I'm just adding an enhancement color here to the petals and creating their little shadows too, and keeping the same principle that the light source is above, and so all the shadows are on the bottom part of the petals. And it's nice too, when you're doing things like this, if you're coloring the green, for instance, to not just use one color of green or one shade. I've used a little bit of a yellow green, and then I've come in with a blue green for my shadows. And that just helps create a little more visual interest in your painting and helps things pop a little more, as opposed to using the same color groupings. Even if they're light and dark, if they're the same color groupings, then they're a little more monochromatic, and depending on the application, might not be as visually interesting. So it's always fun to add a little bit of different color within and kind of vary that around. So I built up the shadows pretty well on the roses. I'm happy with how they're looking. They're looking more like roses. I'm still pretty new at watercolor, but I have a lot of fun. I think it's a really fun medium, and it's challenging for sure, but it's fun to see the results, because watercolor kind of paints itself too. Sometimes it's unpredictable and you don't have a lot of control over it. But paper towel is also a good friend, and so I'm just going back in and adding some more highlights, just soaking up some of the ink from the top parts of the petals too, which is also an alternative technique. It's hard to leave a lot of white for your highlights, so that can also help too, as long as your paper's still wet. So now I'm inking the sentiment here, and I'm using Memento Tuxedo Black ink. And the cute little sentiment, this is such a pretty stamp set. Now with the paper, as I mentioned, it's a watercolor, and it's a heavy poundage, so it's got a lot of bumps, and it was hard to get that stamp completely flush, so I just took my Micron pigment pen, and I think it was a 01 that I used, and I just lined that out and made sure those letters were nice and dark, and I didn't miss any ridges. I used my roller tape and put that on the back of my watercolor card. And this is actually the card base, sorry. This is my A2 folded card. So I want the base of my card to be in this island blue cardstock. And this is from Simon Says Stamp as well. And so I'm just trimming that off to keep the edges flush. So I use my X-Acto knife and my ruler, and use my X-Acto knife to find the edge of my cardstock, and then line my ruler up with that, opposed to lining the ruler up first and then putting the knife to the edge. So this is really pretty. I really like the way this looks and it's turning out. So I'm going to come in here with two-way tape to put the watercolor cardstock onto the base of my card. It's pretty tempting to do foam tape. I really wanted to do foam tape here, but my challenge was to create a flat layer card with this design. So I stuck with the two-way tape, and I'm actually happy I did. I like the way it turned out. The nice thing about this cardstock, this blue cardstock, is it's coordinating with the stamp pad from Simon Says Stamp. So they match beautifully together. They're not an off blue or an off tone. They're perfect together. So I'll put links in the descriptions below as well to those products if you'd like to take a look. And there you have it. This is my watercolor card featuring the Roses for You stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe so you're notified the next time I post a video. Thanks so much for watching.